that's going to happen. And if you manage to break it, to realize how much of it is done, and then you speak about the fact, I was just saying that we have to just, especially to completely bottom up, that we always go to somebody who's saying, you know, weakness, but we need maybe support from some, because that's the reason why there's no official push, and then we super easy, you know, everything else comes before. That's the reason, but there's no, I know what it is, with Marco was one of the most active, so then it was the Lucia, so this sounds really fun.
Hello, good morning to everyone. I am Elena Wiśniak-Malinowska. Let me introduce myself as a new head of adaptation unit in DG Klima European Commission. Today is the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, and I would like us to start immediately with a keynote speech by my colleague from DG Klima, Felice. Please, Felice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm from DG DevCo. One point, a certain point, I may join DG Klima as well. So, yes. Okay. Right. Okay. My name is Felice Zaccheo. I'm the head of the unit responsible for sustainable energy and climate change in the Directorate General for Development Cooperation, Development International Cooperation, and it's really a big pleasure to be here and a big honor. And as Elena said, you know, it's not by accident that we wanted to have this event here. It's because today is the International Day for Disaster Reduction. But let me first thank to Wetlands International for, together with us, organizing this event. And you already see here in place the first panel. And I also want to thank the colleagues from DG Klima, from ECO, from DG ENV, that are here with us and working on this challenge on upscaling sea ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction investment to reduce disaster risk. This is a big challenge that we all face. And I also want to welcome the colleagues from UNI SDR, from UNESCO, from Voice, and all of you that made it here. Big thank to all of you. It's very exciting to be here. And it's, as I said, a great honor to open this event and this two panels debate. It said that over the last 20 years, more than 1.35 million people have died as a result of vulnerability and exposure to natural hazard, with women and girls, of course, paying and bearing the highest toll of it. But then, even more scary, that is over 4 billion people have been displaced and left homeless, injured, or in need of emergency assistance. Disasters, we all know, are gateways to poverty and distress, including large-scale displacement for many vulnerable people living in low and middle-income countries. Global warming, climate change, and increased impact of extreme weather events are increasing. You know, I heard this morning that Ophelia is coming toward Europe and will hit Ireland and Scotland. So this is just another example. So it keeps increasing, keep coming up. And that's why, you know, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction was put in place, you know, was established in order to tackle the issue. And we in the European Union, in the European Commission, under the leadership of ECO, we established already in 2016 the Sendai Action Plan. That in fact, its aim and it's critical for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goal, for the objective of the Paris Agreement of Climate Change, and for the other international conventions like the Convention on Biological Diversity. But this also recognizes the positive role of ecosystem in reducing risk and therefore call for an upscaling of ecosystem-based adaptation and disaster risk reduction approach. To implement the SDGs, we need to match the progresses we have made in reducing loss of life from disasters by making similar advances in reducing the number of people that are affected. And this is exactly this year the aim of Target B of the Sendai framework, that aims exactly to reduce the number of people affected by 2030. Raising awareness, and that's what we have been doing in the previous year. But now, more important, and this we will contribute, taking action on Target B at community level will have a positive impact on saving life, reducing economic losses, and avoiding damage to critical infrastructure. It will also ensure that strategies are in place and implemented at national and at local level. Well, first of all, as I say, we are happy to be here. I'm happy to be here and to host and co-host this event. Also for a reason that we have worked a lot under our programs to tackle these issues. We have our flagship initiative program on climate change, the GCCA Plus, the Global Climate Change Alliance Plus program, that focus to support mainstreaming climate change adaptation and mitigation in LDC and small island development state. GCCA program, Plus program, include in many cases such a ecosystem-based approach to adaptation and disaster risk reduction. But we also have other projects. We support the disaster risk reduction targeted action on eco-DRR through a project that we have been implementing together UN Environment since 2012, including local community pilot project in 4 different countries. And last week, 10 days ago, on the 4th of October, based also and building on the experience that we had with this first program, our member states in this very building on the 4th floor, they have given the go-ahead to finance a project of over 11 million euro, out of which over 7 million euro have been allocated to 3 priority areas to be managed and implemented in 10 countries, together with UN Environment and the Partner for Resilient Alliance, with the Netherlands Red Cross, Cordaid, CARE, Wetlands International, and other partners. You will hear from my colleague, Etienne Coyette, about it in the second panel, what we have learned from the past and what we plan to do in the future. But now, talking about the panel, and then I close, because we are going to action. I have the easy part, entertaining. Now, but the 2 panels have a number of questions they have to address, and because we need this solution, we need this idea to put, as I say, ideas and into action. Well, what does the eco-DRR approach aim to achieve? What are the main benefits for the communities in disaster-affected areas? And how to show evidence on the efficacy and the cost-net effectiveness of community-level ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation solution. This is the challenge we have in the next two panels. This panel. This is the question we are going to ask, we are going to discuss under the leadership and the moderation skills of Elena, that introduced herself, and Lord Ledoux, the Deputy Head of Unit of the Unit in Biodiversity in DGM. But now, after my welcoming remarks, and without further ado, I will leave the floor to my colleague Abhilash Panda, the Deputy Chief of the UNISDR Regional Office for Central Europe and for Europe and Central Asia, that will do the opening remarks. Again, thanks to you all. I wish you a fruitful discussion and look forward to receiving the conclusion and the solution of the matter. Thank you very much.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I was actually prepared for a more formal speech. I actually have a write-up here of a few pages, but maybe I'll just follow the lead of my colleague who spoke before me. First of all, let me thank Wetlands, DG DevCo, Klima, Voice, and everybody that's in the room to spare their time and come here. 2017 International Disaster Day is actually on 13th, but we have been looking at a series of events that's actually happening globally and in Europe since the last few days. There was a very interesting week event yesterday hosted by the Committee of Regions and DG Regios, which looked at the role of local governments in addressing risk reduction and building resilience. But let me put a few thoughts for the panel as they go into the most tedious task of convincing the audience and deliberating the details of ecosystem services. We often use the word natural disasters, but is disasters are actually natural? We don't actually think so. Not all disaster or events are natural. And I'm keeping a category of geophysical events out of this. But it's actually the societal behavior that escalates hazards and takes it creates a disaster around it. Now, sustainable development will not be achieved if countries continue are in constant struggle of rebuilding and recovering out of it. Now, in all this, my previous colleague who spoke before me did put forward a few numbers and figures on what's happening globally. But let me just add to it. Globally, 24 million people are now pushed into poverty every year by disasters, and over 20 million people are forced to leave their homes. And that's where this International Disaster Day comes in. This year's theme is Home Safe Home. And that's the focus. People who are affected the most are the burning end of taking the brunt of every event that occurs in this through the processes and policies that we put in place. Now, disaster risk reduction is like a watermark to the 2030 development agenda. Now, when I am referring to the 2030 development agenda, it's the Paris Agreement, it's the SDGs, the New Urban Agenda, and definitely the Sendai Framework. As I said, it's essential to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly on the eradication of poverty, because there's a huge interlinkage between poverty eradication, sustainable cities, and to reduce the impact of climate change. They're all interconnected in a way or the other. The coherence that UNISDR has been advocating for in the last few years amongst the implementation of this 2030 development agenda, this has been set through the monitoring mechanism that will soon be rolled out. Now, the Sendai Framework, although voluntary agreement, has set out 7 global targets that needs to be achieved by member states through working at all levels. The advantage, or the how would you put, is the area of strength of these indicators and the monitoring mechanism that's going to roll out very soon is built on this idea of that reporting and monitoring should not be for the purpose of one single instrument, but to build the capacity of various mechanisms that are being dealt at a national level. Now, as such, while UNISDR coordinates international efforts in disaster risk reduction and monitoring, the reporting of Sendai framework is going to now assist not only governments in looking at their progress in reducing risk, but also looking at adaptation mechanisms and processes that support a long-term sustainable development. Now, as I said, this year's focus is on Sendai framework target 3. Now, that is to substantially reduce the number of people that are affected. The way the measurements currently are happening takes into account population affected per 100,000 people. Now, the intention is, in a few years' time, we'll be able to compare how this has changed. So back from 2005, going to 2015, and looking all the way to 2030. The subtitle for this year's International Disaster Day, Home Safe Home, captures the relevance of building our societal resilience. It also means that each citizen and inhabitants in cities and at local level can contribute in reducing the risk of disasters, and all of them are actually actors. It's this risk reduction or sustainable development is just not the responsibility of governments, member states, and institutions. It goes all the way to the inhabitants and the people living in those locations and at various levels. Now, within the Sendai framework, understanding risk is one of the first priority areas. Without knowing what risks your countries are currently attending to and what are the potential future risks, there's no way we can address either disaster risk reduction or even target development portfolios that are risk sensitive in nature. With that, UNISDR actually encourages local governments and national governments to build resilience. Some of you may know, or maybe are not aware, that we have a very successful campaign which has been supported by many partners globally, which is called the Making Cities Resilient. Now, this particular campaign comes with various tools and processes. We assist local governments through a tool called Disaster Resilience Scorecard, which looks at identifying gaps at local level, which in turn actually takes local governments to work with their constituency and identifying what kind of mechanisms are in place that supports a day-to-day activity of any individual out there. Now, coming to the topic that we have here today, investment in ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction is predominantly increasing and needs to be scaled up. The coherence that the Paris Agreement, Sendai Framework, and SDGs bring into play will actually assist not only national governments but various practitioners and local governments in understanding the interlinkages amongst various instruments that are being put forward for implementation. Now, the United Nations, with the support of the European Union, will continue working together and supporting all actors to meet the objectives of Paris Agreement, the SDGs, and the Sendai Framework. And the intention will be to be more resilient through specific climate actions and building and sustaining development across all cities and at all levels. Now, while I'll stop with this, I do look forward to the discussion that the experts will have in the next two panels. And I hope that the outcomes of such interesting discussions feed into the various instruments that we have, not only globally, but also in the European context. And I would like to invite all of you to the next European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction that will take place in November 2000 Italy, which will be hosted by the government of Italy. Thank you very much. and it's again a pleasure to be here.
First of all, thank you very much for the inspiring speeches by the two speakers. We have already an event to look forward, even if we are still sitting on this conference. Thank you very much, Felice, and apologies. You see, I see you as part of the same family. Indeed, we work very well together. Indeed, this event is part of a worldwide effort to address the target B of Sendai framework to reduce the number of affected people. And I hope we will have a plan A solutions to do so. When I was preparing for the conference, a recent story from my daughter's book came to my mind. It's a story of a European called Georgina Reid, who is the one who saved from winds and storms and waves, a very iconic and structural building of US on Long Island, Montauk Point Lighthouse. Thanks to her, once eroding bluffs at Montauk have been tamed by a system of terraces to hold the sliding beds. She hasn't been welcomed by the government at the beginning. She has faced indifference by the government, but they were seduced by her skills and by her determination. They came to support her. Certainly a beautiful story of how the combination of nature skills, vision, can preserve our cultural heritage for next generations. And I am sustainable management, conservation of ecosystem, restoration can actually help reduce disaster risk by mitigating hazards, by increasing livelihoods, by increasing resilience, reducing vulnerability. And we will hear from this prominent panel a lot about many examples. And we will discuss the question Felice has relayed to us a couple of minutes ago. Now, what I will do now in a couple of minutes, I will introduce to you all the panelists. They will have then, each of them, 5 minutes for a short statement. And then we will go into discussions on questions, and we open up also to the audience, so that at the end of this first session, we have a set of conclusions that could serve as a feeding ground for the second panel, and at the end we would have a real conclusions from the meeting. You have your homework as the audience also, not only to listen, to participate, but at the end of this meeting, you will have your papers on the table, and you will have to relay 2 messages. First is the one, what you take from the conference, what's the key message, and you should write it in a tweet type message, so 140 characters, keep to the essentials. And then what you want to actually say to the conference. You can be also critical, maybe we didn't respond to all your questions. This is your homework for today. And now, without further overview, I would like to introduce the other members of the panel. I'll start on my left with Ibrahima Sadio Fofana. Ibrahima is the project officer of the Alliance for Resilience. It's an alliance of 5 Netherlands-based members, including Wetlands International, and they partner organizations in the South that promote disaster risk reduction, climate adaptation, and ecosystem management and restoration. Ibrahima, you have a master's degree in and you have worked in multiple local NGOs, and you have an in-depth knowledge of the challenges and opportunities in mind. On my further left, please meet Karin Zaunberger, my colleague from the Commission. Karin is biologist working in the biodiversity unit of the European Commission's DG Environment. Karin, you have been working for 10 years also in DG research, and you have certainly proved your resilience because you have been involved with the negotiations of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Further on my right, please meet Laura Schmidt. Laura also works for the European Commission in the area of disaster risk management since 2009. You are currently in the unit of DG ECO, and you coordinate voluntary peer reviews for EU member states of their disaster risk reduction plan. And you also help in building national disaster loss databases. Thank you very much for coming, Laura. On my further right, bonjour Magali. Magali is Program Coordinator at VOICE, the NGO voluntary organizations in cooperation in emergencies. You represent 85 member organizations, of which most also work with the European Commission DG for Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid. So it's Laura. And on my further right, I would like you to meet Soichiro Yasukara. You are the coordinator for disaster risk reduction and resilience at UNESCO. You also advocate UNESCO's involvement and participation in risk reduction research, capacity building, education, and policy advice. And prior to joining UNESCO, you have been working with the Japanese government, with the Ministry for Land, Infrastructure, Transportation, and Tourism, and in the Cabinet Office of Japan, where you were coordinating also the mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction and building safety for earthquake policies. So as you may see, you have before you a lineup of practitioners. And I will now first give the floor to each of you. I will ask you diligence in your 5 minutes opening statement so that we have sufficient time then to open up and to have a discussion. You will receive this device where you can yourself manage the presentation if you have one. Ibrahim, the floor is yours.
Ok, merci. Je suis vraiment Sadio Fofana de Wetlands International au Mali. Je travaille à Morti, au centre de Wetlands International, à travers une alliance qu'on appelle Partenaires pour la résilience, qui est constituée de 5 organisations internationales, notamment le CARE International, la Croix-Rouge, du climat, Wetlands International et Cordel. Donc, en tant que Wetlands, nous assurons le lead de ce projet au niveau du delta intérieur du Niger, au Mali, dans le sous-bassin du Sous, avec l'appui du ministère des Affaires étrangères des Pays-Bas. Donc, j'ai le plaisir quand même de vous présenter un cadre de réduction des risques de catastrophes qui maintient et ressort le delta intérieur du Niger, qui est un site à Ramsar au niveau du Mali. Comme vous le savez, le delta intérieur du Niger, c'est 30 000 km² et c'est 2 millions de personnes qui dépendent de ces ressources naturelles. Et en tant que pêcheurs, en tant que éleveurs, en tant que riziculteurs. C'est aussi 2 millions de bovins, c'est 3 millions de petits ruminants qui dépendent de la région pendant 6 à 7 mois par an. Et au niveau du delta intérieur du Niger aussi, il est important de comprendre que c'est 50 à 100 000 tonnes de poissons qui sont respectivement pêchés pendant les périodes de faible ou de fort profit. Et aussi, c'est 3 à 4 millions d'oiseaux d'eau qui migrent chaque année dans le delta intérieur du Niger. Les oiseaux d'eau migrateurs passent un bon moment. Donc, c'est dire que le delta intérieur du Niger, c'est vraiment une artère vitale pour toutes ces personnes. Malgré toute cette grande potentialité, il y a un certain nombre de problèmes que nous connaissons, notamment le changement de régime hydrologique. Et quand vous voyez la fluctuation de 2020 à 2000, il y a vraiment une fluctuation, il y a une instabilité de la ressource eau qui constitue la véritable source de vie de ces populations qui sont dans le delta intérieur du Niger. aussi, et cela a eu comme conséquence un problème de surexploitation des ressources naturelles. Le problème de surexploitation, ça a des conséquences. Ça a des conséquences sur l'homme, ça a des conséquences sur les animaux, ça a des conséquences même sur tout ce qui est l'écosystème, parce que ça rend davantage l'écosystème fragile. Donc, c'est tout cela qui a motivé notre alliance partenaire pour la résilience à intervenir. Parce que nous avons constaté une augmentation du niveau de pauvreté dans la zone humide. Et sachant bien que dans cette zone humide, toutes les conditions de vie, toutes les ressources, tout ce qui est opportunité est lié aux écosystèmes. Tu ne peux pas pêcher tant qu'il n'y a pas d'eau. Tu ne peux pas faire de l'agriculture traditionnelle tant qu'il n'y a pas d'eau. Tu ne peux pas faire du pâturage tant qu'il n'y a pas d'eau. Parce que c'est l'eau qui assure la régénération des sites de pâturage. Il y a une aire que nous utilisons au niveau du Mali, au niveau du Delta, que nous appelons le Gourou. C'est très important pour le pâturage. Donc, malgré tout cela aussi, nous avons été motivés par le fait qu'il y a une exposition massive au choc. Tantôt c'est des sécheresses, tantôt c'est des inondations. Et quand il y a sécheresse, ça rend les ressources vulnérables, ça réduit les ressources naturelles, par exemple pour les pasteurs et les éleveurs. Et cela a comme conséquence aussi la régénération sur la multiplication du conflit entre les différents usagers. Si, par exemple, un éleveur doit aller faire le pâturage sur le même site qui est proche du champ d'un agriculteur, c'est qu'il y a un sérieux problème. Et c'est des problèmes que nous voyons. Ce qui nous a motivé aussi à intervenir, c'est que nous avons constaté que quand il y a crise, quand il y a choc, c'est les femmes, c'est les enfants, c'est les personnes âgées qui sont les plus vulnérables. Ce qui nous a motivé aussi, nous avons compris que vraiment ça donne comme conséquence aussi la migration. Donc, ce n'est pas des choix. Donc, PFR, à travers vraiment un modèle que nous avons développé, à travers des outils que nous avons au niveau de nos différentes organisations, nous avons quand même pu restaurer des écosystèmes à travers 20 communautés. C'est à peu près plus de 200 communautés et 300 communautés au niveau du delta intérieur du Niger. Mais le projet quand même a pu restaurer des écosystèmes au sein de 20 communautés. Et ça, c'est très important. Une autre activité de restauration, c'est de restaurer, comme je le disais tantôt, les zones de pâturage. C'est aussi les zones de frayère pour les poissons, parce que les poissons aussi se reproduisent sous les mêmes ailes. Et aussi, ça permet, comme vous l'avez constaté sur les images, c'est une opportunité aussi pour les oiseaux de migrer et de pouvoir séjourner en longtemps. Donc, nous avons pu restaurer au sein de 20 communautés. Et à travers cela, ce qui nous a motivés, nous avons été motivés par les problèmes à pouvoir soutenir les modes de subsistance au niveau des 20 communautés. Et les modes de subsistance à travers des approches où nous mettons la communauté au centre. La communauté elle-même fait sa planification à travers des outils que nous mettons à leur disposition. Les outils, par exemple, ABCA, analyse de la l'adaptation au changement climatique, des outils fiscaux que nous utilisons, et sur la base de ces outils, les communautés parviennent à faire des petites planifications, adapter leurs moyens de subsistance sur ce qu'ils ont d'abord comme force, et sur la base de ce qu'ils ont, à partir de cela, nous identifions des actions que nous pouvons apporter à ces communautés pour davantage renforcer leur résilience. Donc, il y a des activités de microcrédit, des activités d'embauche bovine, etc. Tout ce qui est activité générative de revenus dans la résilience. Et toutes ces activités aussi sont accompagnées de petits plans de contingence communautaire où des activités en amont sont programmées, des activités pendant et des activités après. Parce que aussi nous facilitons l'accès à l'information climatique, à l'information hydrologique pour les préparer en conséquence à comprendre comment est-ce qu'il faut se préparer, comment est-ce qu'il faut répondre à un cas de catastrophe. Vous avez quelques images aussi d'adaptation de réduction des risques de catastrophe. Vous voyez dans le delta intérieur du Niger, certes il y a de l'eau, mais le sérieux problème c'est que l'eau n'existe pas pendant les 12 mois de l'année. L'eau est en quantité importante pendant un moment, mais à un moment ça disparaît carrément. Donc il y a vraiment une influence, un plaidoyer aussi que nous avons fait à travers les organisations de la société civile comme porteur de messages pour influencer, pour interpeller les décideurs afin que le partage de l'eau soit vraiment équitable pour permettre de mieux vivre, de mieux exploiter Et voilà, il y a différentes ressources sur les moins de subsistance. Donc, cette planification a été faite, comme je l'ai dit, au niveau communautaire, au niveau de la commune, au niveau de la région aussi. Et le défi majeur, c'est de voir comment est-ce qu'il faut amener cela à un niveau bassin, afin que les différents niveaux soient davantage connus. Et en conclusion, je dirais que les terres humides et les terres sèches au niveau du Sahel sont vraiment connectées. Et il n'y a pas de résilience au Mali tant que les zones humides ne sont pas davantage saines. Nous avons constaté vraiment cela. Et le maintien des zones humides nécessite une planification à différents niveaux. Donc, ce n'est pas au niveau communautaire, mais il faut interlier les différents niveaux, du niveau national jusqu'au niveau communautaire. Nous avons vu cette pertinence. Il y a un besoin d'équilibrer les besoins d'eau en amont et en aval. Vu les infrastructures qui sont en train d'être réalisées, donc les barrages et autres, il est important vraiment d'équilibrer cela. Il y a une nécessité de milliers des besoins pour le développement de l'agriculture et de l'industrie à grande échelle avec les besoins communautaires locaux. Donc, 20 communautés ont été accueillies, mais il serait plus intéressant d'aller au-delà de 20, pourquoi pas 40 ou plus. Donc, voici vraiment, mesdames et messieurs, le mot quand même pour cette petite introduction. Je vous remercie.
Merci Ibrahima, c'était très intéressant. Vous montriez l'importance du capital naturel pour la richesse aussi du pays. Vous avez beaucoup parlé de l'action, de petites actions, mais qui a beaucoup d'impact. Et ça, peut-être, ça va lier aussi avec la présentation suivante. Alors maintenant, c'est pour Karine pour continuer. Merci.
Thank you, Elena. Good morning, colleagues. I would like to continue where one of our opening speakers actually had left us when he mentioned this range of multilateral agreements. We have the Sendai framework, the CBD, strategic planning, Aichi targets, the SDGs, and the Paris Agreement. And the issues targeted by all these different agreements, the disaster risk reduction, climate change, sustainable development, biodiversity loss, are interlinked and interdependent, and they cannot be solved in isolation. That means there's a need for coherence in what we could call a convergence in implementations. We cannot do first tackle climate change and after that biodiversity loss or the other way around. All this brings a terrible complexity, which also gives kind of a messiness when we think about what are our measures, our policy measures, our instruments, our actions. But I think we should also look at this complexity as a chance that we can actually probably support prioritize measures that provide multiple benefits that serve several purposes and actually contribute to several of these multilateral agreements. And here we come to these ecosystem-based approaches, which we are trying to upscale as they provide multiple benefits. They are very often cost efficient, they are easily accessible and ready for use, as it has been demonstrated also by the speaker before. We could actually say these are convenient solutions for an inconvenient truth. Now, the ecosystem approach has been coined and adopted by the Convention on Biological Diversity quite some more than a decade back, and the CBD has done a tremendous amount of work on this issue on biodiversity and climate change in forms of dedicated COP decisions and also technical series reports that accompany these decisions. One point to be highlighted is the decision on biodiversity and climate change and disaster risk reduction, adopted 3 years back in Pyeongchang, which really highlighted this link of biodiversity, climate change, and disaster risk reduction. Then last year in 2016, CBD COP adopted a short-term restoration action plan review as a flexible framework in order to mobilize further the implementation of restoration. As we notice, whenever a disaster strikes, then kind of people remember the buffering effect of ecosystems. Ecosystems, they physically stabilize the movement of water, earth, rocks, and snow, and they help us to prevent or at least mitigate landslides. They can buffer also against sudden hazards. They cannot prevent them, but they can buffer them. So wetlands and floodplains, they buffer flash floods. Mangroves and coral reefs, they buffer tidal surges. Forests and other vegetation buffer landslides. And also we spoke about the urban area. Green spaces in the cities buffer the heat island effect, and also can kind of control the water runoff. So again, then we come back to the power of ecosystems. And actually very often after big disasters strike, struck, I have to say, then you find high investments in this approach. For example, after the superstorm Haiyan in the Philippines, you saw a big increase of investment in restoration of mangroves. After the storm Sandy, there was a presidential executive order to prioritize what in US, United States, they call back then the ecological infrastructure, which is another word for green infrastructure or nature-based solutions. So what we should try to do really is to act before disaster strikes, to decrease vulnerability and increase resilience for the people and for the ecosystem. So what we need is directing investments and catalyzing action. Now in the EU, we have now quite a range of policies already in place, which we can use, and we should use even further, such as the biodiversity strategy and its green infrastructure strategy, the EU adaptation strategy, water policy, which proposes natural water retention measures. We have under Horizon 2020 a work stream on nature-based solutions, which also includes the ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction and so on. So what we have to do is trying to seize this challenge, turn it into an opportunity, join forces, and step up implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin, for your sobering messages about acting before than acting too late. Indeed, in the world, we often do the latter. And also, I liked very much your messages about going for solutions that have multi-purpose benefits. That's indeed very important. Now, over to Laura for her opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elena. I want to add really a little bit to the picture that many of the colleagues from the Commission have already drawn up for you on what we're actually doing on disaster risk reduction. And first of all, as DGF, I would also like to emphasize how happy we are to have this joint event on International Disaster Risk Reduction Day. So that's a great opportunity to get together and have a discussion around the kind of common strands that Karin has just been discussing. Focusing a little bit on Europe, because in ECHO we have a both aid, notably DRR, but also disaster prevention inside of Europe. And in Europe as well, we're clearly facing a lot of challenges. We've had a very terrible forest fire season in the Mediterranean countries with huge losses, including human losses, which is obviously also one of the Senate targets to actually reduce those losses. And we've also seen the first autumn storms already hitting, and we've had in the overseas territories a very significant hurricane season. So what are we doing in Europe in order to address these challenges? Well, as far as implementing the Senate framework is concerned, we have developed an action plan which covers what Karin has basically explained to you. So that's kind of bringing together all these different actors that have to contribute, sitting everybody down around the table and agreeing on priorities to achieve those 7 targets we have on the Sendai. And if anybody's interested, we have a long Sendai action plan that was published that you can look at. It has about 152 actions, I think, so clearly there's a lot for us to go through. And concretely for today's topic, there are a number of actions that concern also ecosystem-based DRR and upscaling ecosystem-based DRR. And what I want to focus on particularly is the need to bring some evidence to the discussion, and the need also to gather data and prove this concept. So we have under the EU research programs a number of calls, a number of big research projects that are financed in this area to prove and also to demonstrate nature-based solutions. And in ECHO as well, we have small, what we call prevention and preparedness projects, which can also contribute to that because they address mainly the local and regional levels. So they bring together both disaster risk reduction, civil protection, but also scientific communities. And we've had for a number of years priorities around using nature-based solutions, around introducing disaster risk reduction concepts at local level. So, for example, we've had communities in Sweden and Italy that are both prone to landslides because of the type of ground and terrain they have. and adopting nature-based solutions, reforesting, for example, using stabilization measures based on plants and other natural things. And that is something that we would also like to upscale a bit. So, for example, if it works in Italy and Sweden, we can then share it with, say, Norway and Portugal and the areas they have that might be exposed to the same risks. How do we know who has the same risks? Well, we do have an EU overview of risks, and that shows that there are a number of risks that are actually common. Sometimes they're cross borders, sometimes, as I just said in the example, for example, the North and the South might actually be sharing some risks and can also exchange on the methods they're using. 4 out of the key risks we've discussed in the current overview of risks are actually natural hazards. The others are more geological hazards and also what we call man-made risks, which are a lot to do also with failures of critical infrastructure. But clearly there's also a link, and this is also highlighted in the report. So natural hazards, as we've already said today, they're first of all not just natural, they're also the result of the vulnerability. But secondly, they can also have knock-on effects. So you can see critical infrastructures, communications going down, a road being blocked, and other things happening after the hazard or the disaster has actually happened. And that's something that we've highlighted is also an area we need to work on, as is climate change and climate change effects. So that brings me back to today's topic, because between climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, one of the common tools we've identified is indeed eco-DRR and using nature-based solutions. So I'd be very happy to take questions later and discuss how we can, between the two communities, also work together on implementing them more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. You brought something very important to the table, and it's to say we can probably not stop the natural disasters, but we can still equip ourselves with the best knowledge to prevent them in the future. And this is where your work on risks is so important. I will now hand over to Magali, who will tell us, are we ready? Are we prepared in the member states?
Thank you, Ina. And I would like to thank Wetlands also for organizing this great event, bringing together on these different perspectives. I think it's very useful. So just before I start, VOICE is a network of 85 European NGOs actively major aid worldwide. And since 2007, VOICE has brought together a disaster risk reduction working group, which is composed of around 30 NGOs, with the goal of contributing to and improving EU and EU member state policies and practices on disaster risk reduction. So today I would like, maybe in this 5 minutes intro, to present you this study and the main finding and recommendation from this study that was commissioned by VOICE, written by Max Bird, and published in April 2017. And the study looks at EU member state policies and practices in disaster risk reduction in international aid. So as a first step, the study looks at the concept of DRR and how it's related to the different global frameworks. And we heard it already this morning. DRR is indeed integrated, not only, I mean, of course, we have the standard framework, but it's also very highly prominent into the SDGs, into the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, in the Paris Agreement, naturally, but also in the commitments taken within the World Humanitarian Summit, especially under the core responsibility linked to changing those lives. So, within this study, we wanted to look a little bit at EU member state policies and practices. So we looked at 8 different member states, and we examined not only their strategy and the decision-making process in relation to disaster risk reduction, but also at programming level, how much resources they would dedicate to DR and the type of project they would fund, and then we compared these different reviews, and out of that we were able to draw some recommendations also based on the identification of some very good practices we found in the member states. So I would like today just to introduce you to 3 or 4 main recommendations from this study.
So the first one is really around the need for member states to develop or revise their current disaster risk reduction policy. Many of the 8 have a strategy that is still referencing to the Yoga framework for action. I think it's really critical to the member states to revise their policy so that they could also, through this new policy, embrace the commitments they have taken in the different framework. And I think in light of the event today, it will be an excellent opportunity for them to also promote and include the concept of eco-DRR inside this policy, so that it can then trickle down into their own program. Also, I think we heard it this morning, but despite the increasing recognition we have on the cost benefits and the impact of disaster risk reduction, there's still really a need to make it they are much more visible in strategy, and especially in development approaches. So far, I mean, we are not able to just measure how much funding is going to disaster risk reduction within development projects. Today, I mean, in the study, we are able only to measure how much funding is going to the humanitarian aid project. But we know it's essential for disaster risk reduction to be taken on board by the development community. But under the OECD DAC criteria, so far there's no actual code to input on the This is something we need to work on. Now, looking at policy and programming, I can only also insist on the need to look at and focus clearly on vulnerability and risk. The lead line behind the agenda is our common agenda now for development and humanitarian aid community. But if we want it to be a reality, this principle is essential also in disaster risk reduction targeting, and we need to make sure that when member states or decision makers look at risk management, and this they need to complement those that are with localized one. They need to work with the community and to make sure that disaster risk reduction is prioritized at local and community level. And last but not least, of course, we need to see member states as, and together with the EU, continuing and investing even more on disaster risk reduction, given its impact and benefits. Thanks for the time.
Merci beaucoup, Magali. Well, that was also a very important message to member states. You send them more or less back to the drawing board. You want them to be more strategic, to have some focus, and actually to provide for the right funding. Thank you very much for these recommendations. I hope the representatives in the room will take it back to their capitals, if need be, of course. And now I hand over to Solcherov, the last on the panel, for his presentation.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for the organizers of this nice event, and also thank you very much for including UNESCO for this event. So I would like to share with you what the UNESCO's approach on disaster reduction, including ecosystem first, and then I would like to share with you several projects we have been engaged in for the ecosystem DRR. Okay, so UNESCO is a UN organization which specializes in education, science, and culture. And each division they have a disaster risk reduction component. And what we make sure is that we have a synergy between these sectors, so that we have a synergy, we have a added value for the activities for the disaster risk reduction, including ecosystem. And we also have an extensive network which includes 50 field offices around the world, and also have an extensive expert network on academics or national institute, so that not only from our knowledge, but we can also access to the knowledge to have a better idea for the ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. And also we try to have a both ways approach, like a bottom-up and also a top-down approach. We of course we do a small project on the ground to see if this solution is effective or not. But at the same time, we always try to make sure to approach to the government, to mainstream disaster risk reduction or ecosystem DRR. This is a basic approach for our activities on disaster risk reduction, including ecosystem DRR. So let me share with you 3 examples of how we have been engaged. First one is from Europe, which is Wetlands in Germany, Netherlands, and also Denmark, which is a very big area. This is a World Heritage from UNESCO, and this is a non-biosphere site of UNESCO. Due to the natural landscape and also biodiversity. But this area was hit by a severe storm in the past, and then the UNESCO and the government in these regions have discussed how to restore the areas. And then they decided to focus on the ecosystem-based restorations. So what we have identified is that we try to preserve the seagrass you see on the bottom, not focusing on the critical concrete infrastructures. So these seagrass prevent the erosion of the areas to deal with the flooding or sea rise levels. In planning of these solutions, the government in these areas try to do scientific research and monitoring to make sure that it is effective for preventing the disasters against sea rise level or floodings. This is one of the examples from Europe. Next two will be from Asia. This is from Philippines, Cordilleras. And this is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of the traditional land use. What you see is that for the past 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years, locals start to make a rice field on the terrace on the surface of the slide, which have been preventing the landslide and the rock slide, etc. But I think in the past there was a drought, and people stopped to do the traditions, and also the migration to the city from the locals. They stopped to do these traditions. But because this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, UNESCO and experts send a mission to these areas, how to work on these areas, because the World Heritage Site started to have a landslide and disasters. So we worked with the national government and local government to come up with the ideas how to restore the areas. And then we try to bring back the rice terrace to prevent the disasters. But we did not just go for a cultural point of view, but we also thought about the socio-economic point of view, why people don't come back or how people make it sustainable their lives. Okay. So we started with a very small pilot project in a cultural heritage site, but we need to scale up to the whole regions, whole region in the World Heritage Site. So this is what we have done. This is what we expected to scale up to the whole areas. And last one is Sumatra in Indonesia, but this is not directly hit by natural disasters, but this was kind of a cascading effect of the tsunami in 2004 in Indonesia or in Thailand. Because after the tsunami, many people lost their houses and they need to rebuild their houses. And then they started to cut a lot of trees in Sumatra, which was in a natural heritage site. Because also this is also a natural heritage site. UNESCO experts and the missions how to conserve the forestation, because they are now overcutting the trees, which started to have a landslide or flash flood in these areas. So again, we work with locals and local governments how to how to raise awareness for the locals not to cut trees too much. In this case, we started with rolling and try to raise awareness, but I think the next step is to include more stakeholders. For example, we might include construction sectors or local governments so that people understand comprehensively the importance of the ecosystem and how to use the natural resources.
Thank you very much, Soichiro. You made us a tour of the world with these beautiful pictures and actually reminded us that the landscapes are not only part of, of culture, but they need to be habited by people. This process needs to be extremely engaging and inclusive with the communities to get the agreement. Right. We have now, I would say, 20 minutes where, first of all, I would like to start with a question to the audience to wake you up if by chance you fall asleep. First of all, is there anybody who doubts that there are benefits for nature-based disaster risk reduction solutions? Is there any doubter in the room? Somebody we need to convince? Perfect. This means for me that I don't have to now ask the panelists about the benefits, but we rather will focus on what are the challenges to go for these solutions. What are the challenges? And I will ask everybody to say just few words. What are the challenges from their perspective to go for such solutions? Second, we have heard from Ibrahima about small scale still projects, and in his ending, he has opened up why should we have not only 20 communities, but much more than that. Upscaling, what to do for upscaling, how we can go from local to national and then global. And third of all, how to make people engage, how to have broader communities with us. So these are the three questions, which are also for you, for the audience. If you want to react, please feel free for that. But first of all, we will go to the panelists. First for challenges, very quickly, few words, 1, 2 sentences, no big talk. Who wants to start? Perfect, Carrie, go ahead.
Well, I offered to start because I think to some extent I already said it, I will just repeat it. I think for the upscaling, what we do, how can we make it that 100 communities instead of 20 communities? If we manage to step up the direct investments to catalyze actions, it's not that complicated, it just needs to be done. Now the question is more, how do we get people to do this? I think we know the how, but how can we manage the decision makers also have the power to make the decision to do this? I think how we do it. And in terms of the evidence and how to better link ecosystem-based adaptation and ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, there are voluntary guidelines in preparation for exactly that. So I think this is also a good way of helping to upscale this.
Thank you. Whoever wants to start, you already started on the second question, so I leave it open if you want to react to challenges, to upscaling, or to the multi-stakeholder. Who's next?
I think one of the biggest challenges for the ecosystem DRR is that I think we don't have enough cases compared to the physical measures for DRR, which is very conventional, using concrete, making dam, etc. With these dams, we have a very good viable cost-benefit analysis system, how it works. But on the contrary, eco-based system, it takes time from the beginnings, and then we don't have much, I think, data or evidence that it works. But I'm very optimistic because ecosystem DRR, as first mentioned in the Sendai framework of the DRR in 2015, I think before the flow framework 2005, it was mentioned, and of course 1995, the Yokohama framework was mentioned. So I think it's catching more awareness of this ecosystem DRR. So I'm very appreciative that even though we don't have much cases, we don't have much, we might not have much evidence, I'm sure it will come to get attention to the people. One of the examples is that there was a big tsunami in 2011 in Japan, mostly in Japan. And I think what we did is in a very conventional way, making a dam and making the seawall again. But now, when I see the comments by the experts in Japan that maybe we should go more on the ecosystem DRR, etc. So I think some budget allocated on these areas. So I think after people identify the ecosystem DRR, I think it will change.
Thank you very much for that. I was once wondering, I was on a panel also and was giving cases of adaptation, good project, and I was surprised that many of us gave actually the same project. It means the pool is not yet large enough, but indeed these are the first birds, and it will take some time, but I think it's very important to build on that. And also, if you join the point that Karin made before, that there is this awareness raising. For instance, you mentioned the mangroves project. You mentioned also after tsunami there is more awareness. So thank you very much for that. We will note it down. It's also good for further discussions. Anybody else who wants to react on challenges and upscaling, on the multi-stakeholder platform, how to do it? Natalie.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the challenges, as we've seen, and that's probably a challenge for the whole DR community, is we need to continue to raise awareness to decision makers around the benefit of DR and also, of course, around the benefit of eco-based DR. And I think we're probably speaking too much within ourselves as a community. I mean, it's great we have managed to break some of the silos we had up to now at EU level between digital and and just the fact that we're here today all together, civil society is already a great step, but now we need to probably work together in relation to advocacy, awareness, raising to a wider audience, to make sure that, again, at EU member states would revise their policy, that they include eco-based DR as an essential concept, and then based on that, that we can really foster the investment for that. When it comes to upscaling, I mean, I'm a representative of NGOs, and I think I understand there's a need to upscale program, but we need to make sure that while we upscale program, we maintain clear link with the communities. So you need to really ensure you keep on working with civil society organizations that have this direct relation with the affected population. Who knows the best how your ecosystem was 20 years ago? Who knows the best where risk really lies in your community? It's the people themselves. So, and this relation with the people is extremely is something that NGOs are used to have, and working with civil society organizations on the ground is something NGOs are already having expertise on.
Thank you very much. You actually didn't speak only about challenges, but you pointed at very important solutions. I just note that the keywords, it requires continuity, breaking down the silos, and of course engagement with communities that are the most affected. I think it was also in Sochiro's presentation very much the 3 cases. But what I have spotted also in your presentation and Karin's, there is a sort of feeling that all this must be a bit like policy induced. There must be a strong political leadership. Is it what we all agree to? Is this what you all in the room would agree to? Or is it you can start with, let's say, with the market players or with the communities, and then, come to the policy makers. This is what we want. This is what we should do. You should do. Is there any opinion on that in the room? Yeah, please. If you could just identify yourself, say from where you are coming.
Yes, thank you. I'm Natalie Cordas from the ACP Secretariat, African Caribbean and Pacific Secretariat, based here in Brussels. And I would just like to say briefly that I am in sync with a lot of the points which have been raised. because I feel that everyone who has spoken so far endorse the perspective of the ACP group, because we all believe that we have a common but differentiated responsibility. And you asked in terms of how is it should be approached. I think it's responsibilities of the governments, because management starts at home. It's also the responsibilities of the communities, because they are the ones that have the first-hand knowledge. I think we also have to have responsibility to realize that both entities have to be interrelated, and you also said, even from the presentations, that we cannot afford to speak in silos anymore. So even within the governments, we have to ensure that directorates, ministries dealing with environment speaks to those who deal with planning, who deal with urbanization, who deal with health, who deal with women, people with disabilities. It's a holistic approach, and I think, Secretary, that is our main priority. How do we follow up? Because we cannot assume that governments are not aware. It's how do they build on this awareness, and that is our challenge. How do they show their commitment by their the investment, and how can their relations with the international community be used to complement what they have invested? And another thing which I also would like to briefly comment on is the whole issue of the existence of data. We have to ensure that when we speak, we must not assume that there is no data. Of course, we have a myriad and we have a wide range of data that exists, but is there a common sharing of data? Is there a replication of data? And also, is the data that exists, is it being acknowledged and used so that it can be a part of the wider pool of the analysis? And if you just, in the case of, we made brief references here to West Africa, and we also know about what's happening in East Africa. In the case of the IGAD Secretary, they have had many years of analysis of droughts and floods, the impact on communities, and the very valid point, how just the scarcity of water can result in conflict, and how conflict in turns can spill over to the whole challenges which we know in relation to migration. So everything, there are many interlinkages, and I completely welcome the approach that doesn't look at it only in one entity, but you look at it at the micro level, at the local and the national levels, and I would like to broaden the scope to acknowledgement of what has been faced at the regional level, because as we know, disasters know no boundaries. And then where does this fit into the wider discourse here in the international level and also globally at the multilateral level? And as 4 countries, we have to ensure that there's a consistent and open acknowledgement of who is doing what, how best it can be done, and how we can not just learn from each other, but compartmentalize and feed on the knowledge which exists at the communities.
Thank you very much. This was also a very important contribution to our discussion, mostly when it comes how to join all the aspects. When I started in the Commission, it was before the Stern report, the Lord Stern report has been published. And climate change has been at that time, I think, perceived more as an environmental issue. And as I went along, it actually put on a lot of new issues. It opened up completely new areas, be it health, be it migration. Now we talk about security threats coming from climate. It's very interesting that everybody becomes a part of this community. You also alluded to a new thing we haven't so much discussed is the data, how we use data, and also I took it as a pledge for open data so that we can share the data, we can compare, and we can raise awareness. Just, for to contribute to the debate yesterday, we have met with representatives of insurance, and what they were saying, for them it's very difficult to price the signals, coming from the disasters, because there is still not a history of frequency of these disasters. But I think after quite some decades of this happening, this should be already the case. And the market actually also should help us to say, this is a flood-prone area, there you shouldn't build, or this is an area where we had landslides, etc. So, and this is where both the adaptation and this disaster risk reduction indeed should go hand in hand. Any other reactions from the floor or from the panelists on what we are discussing? Yes, please.
My name is Minder de Vries from the Deltaris Foundation in the Netherlands. I will be in the next panel, but I have a remark really thinking along that line of open data. I think that we are very much helped with this line, these concepts and this line of thinking. But what we in Deltaris and in the Netherlands see is that we really have a lot of spent a lot of efforts even in this line of open data thinking to get stuff organized, to make these analyses possible. I think that effort should be even fortified and to help us further in disaster risk reduction assessments stronger in the future.
Thank you very much. Yes, another consideration.
Thank you. I'm from the United Nations Refugee Agency, and our focus is more the displacement of populations as a result of natural disasters. And this is something what's been discussed here is something we completely agree with. The use of the ecosystems to reduce disaster risk reduction. We also see that every year millions of people are forced to leave their homes, and out of 23.5 million persons have been displaced since 2008. UNHCR is engaged in some initiatives in order to reduce disaster displacement risks, and we are engaged in developing tools and guidance in this aspect. For example, UNHCR is contributing to the development of a Words into Action implementation guide for the Sendai framework on questions of mobility, displacement, relocation, and evacuation, in accordance with the platform on disaster displacement work plan. We're working on a draft which will be finalized for consultation in 2018. Furthermore, what our focus is, we focus on the actual displaced communities. We also work with governments, but what we promote is that relocation processes can carry serious risks for those it intends to benefit, and it must be considered as a last resort and only undertaken in full consultation with affected communities. If undertaken in a planned and people-centered approach, the planned relocation can be a disaster risk reduction strategy to prevent future disaster displacement. In this regard, since 2013, the UNHCR, Brookings Institute, and Georgetown University have had a partnership and have developed a guidance on reducing risks for forced displacement through planned relocation, and has recently translated this principled guidance into a practical toolbox for states contemplating and implementing planned relocations. This guidance and toolbox is available on our website. And finally, UNHCR works to ensure that there is a policy coherence in reducing risk for disaster displacement, including across the implementation of Sendai framework on DRR, Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the SDGs, and the Global Compact on refugees and migration.
Thank you very much for informing us of the activities you are undertaking. Indeed, it's important. I mean, I've been struck myself when I read that, for instance, the Syrian war has been preceded by a very severe drought, and so where the conflicts, for instance, in Somalia, so there is a clear link between let's say, degradation of the natural environment and the inter-communities, conflict, displacement, etc. And we are starting to discuss more and more also the term of climate refugees that is very much coming to the fore. Is there anybody who wants to contribute to this discussion? Yeah.
Yes, please. My name is Sanne Vermeulen from Coordinate. We are part of the Partners for Resilience Alliance and also the Voice Network. And since 2011, we are, as Partners for Resilience, working on climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and ecosystem restoration, together also with wetlands, among others. And we have built these kind of evidence in the field because we have been working in 10 countries in the south. And at the same time, we are also influencing policies and investments. And we have been seeing from our practice in the field that it's very important to work with an integrated approach and with a multi-stakeholder stakeholder approach, especially to already carry out multi-stakeholder risk assessments with communities and local governments from the very beginning. That's really key. And with regards to upscaling, we are also very happy that now, because of what we have been doing the last years as Partners for Resilience, we are now also have the opportunity to upscale our work through the approved project, what Mr. Feliz Zaccheo was mentioning in his opening speech. So that gives us an opportunity also to upscale our work. And also together with UNISDR, we are partnering in making cities resilient campaign. Also with Voice, we will share good practices because what we heard is that maybe the cases are not really, people are not really aware of good cases, so we can also support that with our network. What we are all doing is to improve households' capacity to drought and flood, and also to, with regards to today's theme, make them feel safe in their village and city again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these words and also the important work you are doing concerning the, for instance, support of good cases. I mean, if you are the amplifier of the good of reputation of good cases, this is always useful. And I can only agree with you that there is always a need of integration at a very early stage. Is there anybody else? I think I had Laura on the list. I'm looking at the panelists, and I think after Laura, we will close the first panel. Is there a coffee break foreseen? Then we have a coffee break where you can continue these discussions, and then we will come back for the second panel. Now, Laura.
Thank you. I'll try and be quite brief so you can get your coffee. I just wanted to react briefly to what was said on kind of climate refugees or the overall refugee situation, which of course for us as humanitarian aid donor is something we're very much aware of, and humanitarian aid needs worldwide at a record level, and we see a lot of displaced people and refugees. Now that in a way brings us to a paradoxical situation, because humanitarian aid budgets are under so much pressure that occasionally it then becomes difficult to advocate for DRR, even though that will then get you into a kind of vicious circle where you're ever increasing the vulnerability. So it's something that we're trying to work with and trying to square the circle in a way. Also linked to the point on data, one thing we're doing is we're using the Informed Risk Index for our own budget allocation for determining which countries are actually the most vulnerable. It uses a lot of data coming from UN agencies. UN agencies themselves are users because it's a kind of flexible index where you can choose the actual indicators that are relevant for your work. And then based on that, we try to invest in those countries where help is most needed. Also some what we call forgotten crises, which are maybe not in the news every day, but which still leave a lot of people in vulnerable situations. So for instance, we were we were present in Burma for many, many years before this crisis, so the working has now unfortunately escalated a lot. And further to the data, just one final point, We are building databases, both the DEFCO colleagues, and I'm sure Etienne will tell you more about that in the second panel later on, and also in Europe, because indeed a lot of data is there, so we need to kind of bring it out, bring it together, and that will then help us make this point again, that we need to invest, that investment can be positive, it can show results, the results can show up, whether it's the insurance industry that has the data, or the government. At the end of the day, it's not really that important. Even the important thing is that we exchange about it.
Thank you very much. I will a little bit wrap up in just few words, few key words that were mentioned here in these very interesting, and thank you very much to all, conversations. We need certainly more cases and more good cases of good projects based on nature against the disaster risks. We certainly need a very strong political leadership and continuity. We need to resource from silos and go for an integrated approach. The integrated approach is between the disaster risk reduction and adaptation, but it's also structural integration within the whole chain of access that are being concerned. We need strong engagement of communities, sharing, this has been mentioned several times. And we also need good data, but also open data. So you empower these communities actually to prepare better for disaster situations. Thank you very much to the first panel. Now we can go for our coffee, and we have 15 minutes for coffee break. And then I would like you to invite back to the room so that we can continue our discussion. Thank you.